The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this Henry Stewart Events webinar, High Impact Applications of DAM CMS Metadata, sponsored by Claravine. We're delighted to have a global audience of 230 attendees registered today. Please send in your questions during the presentation, and we'll answer them during the Q&A at the end. And we are recording the webinar, and you'll all be sent a link to the recording tomorrow. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome our speaker, Michael Shearer. Michael has led marketing operations teams and agencies for more than a decade, building and executing key marketing and analytics systems. He is currently head of digital marketing at Claravine, which is a leading data standardization platform, helping top global brands get the most from their marketing technology, content, and campaign investments. Thank you for joining us, Michael, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I'm excited to be here, and thank you everyone who's joined today. A little bit more about myself. I've been fortunate to be working in the digital space since 2000, starting at a company called Digital River, moving on to a variety of interesting spaces, including online ed, mobile commerce, marketing automation, and other nascent business models and software categories, at their respective times at least. It's been a long and winding road to get to where I am today, but I've learned a ton and I'm excited to now be part of Claravine and to share a little bit of my experience and what I see happening right now, especially when it comes to the application of metadata. Metadata is underrated, and saying metadata is underrated is probably understated, and yet Lucille here is annoyed with my corniness. I may not be a full-blown expert in metadata, but I've had enough firsthand experience with it to be confident, or at least hopeful, that the following presentation has many truths. In the presentation that follows, I'll address some problem areas and opportunities for improvement that I think are truly high impact, especially for larger enterprises with tons of content. So let's get started. Here are 5 areas where missing metadata impacts the bottom line. As I've explored metadata against my current and past work, I've identified these 5 ways missing metadata is detrimental. I believe there are more, but these have clear negative impacts on your digital performance. They are the lack of indexing and findability in your enterprise DAM and customer-facing search functionality, decreased visibility of key information available on key external search engines and social platforms, poor accessibility for people with disabilities, suboptimal display of content within your own managed digital experiences, and lost opportunities within recommendation engines and dynamic related content. And I'm going to go into each one now. So first, lack of indexing and findability in your DAM or CMS. One of the most common problems in the content creation process is the duplication of efforts. And that's often because people can't find what they're looking for. And they usually can't find what they're looking for because there were no standards in creating the file name, tagging, or other respective metadata. Therefore, internal DAM searches come up empty even when the file likely exists. The final impact is both time wasted and, in certain enterprises, a significant waste of money on storage costs. The second one is the visibility of key information available on external search engines and social platforms. Probably not news to many of you, but search engines and social platforms are relying more and more on metadata to enrich results in their search engine pages and feeds. Not having this rich metadata available or structured, standardized properly is going to cost you visibility, site traffic, and ultimately money from lost conversions. I understand in the race to publish large volumes of content, some of these things seem trivial, but the difference between a rich snippet on Google and a standard one is a significant variance in a click-through rate. Similar can be said for social, especially Facebook. If you're not inputting the proper metadata values that map to something like their open graph, you're missing out on optimized content formats and improved user engagement. The third is poor accessibility for people with disabilities. And I don't know if you've ever reviewed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but if you didn't think site metadata was important before, I think this one will be eye-opening. Consider alone, when you go there, the section entitled Perceivables. Each of those main sections, text alternative, time-based media, adaptable and distinguishable, are content objects or subsets of them that require significant metadata to be certifiably accessible. Additionally, there's a section 1.3 adaptable that has a section on info and relationships that has a library of markup and other attributes required to meet this adaptable criteria. And I don't mean to alarm or create more work for you, but I do want to illustrate with a lawsuit related to not adhering to similar site accessibility standards. And this is just a quote from an article. The National Federation of the Blind versus Target Corporation set a precedent in 2008 when it agreed to settle a lawsuit alleging that its website was not accessible to the blind, agreeing to improve the website and pay $6 million into a damages fund for members of the class action lawsuit. The court also awarded $3.7 million in attorney fees. So this is a real problem that's being enforced. And I mean, that was 12 years ago. It's obviously become more and more of an issue today. As digital experiences proliferate in nearly every area of our life, we need to provide great experiences for all audiences, echoing the Internet Society's guiding principle that the Internet is for everyone. This includes the estimated 1 billion people with disabilities across the world. The fourth is suboptimal content displayed within your own managed digital experiences in rich media. Think about this. How many screen sizes, device types, or other digital engagement platforms are out there right now? Further, how many variants and components can you have in a collection of dynamic content or rich media? The answer for some large enterprises, I believe, is essentially infinite. I want to do a little exercise here. Remember the factorials in middle school math? Well, rich media combinations can lead to that. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but imagine the following rich media variants. So you're running a rich media ad. You have 9 headlines, 8 descriptions, 7 images, 6 ad sizes, 5 layouts, 4 calls to action, 3 color schemes, 2 landing pages, and a campaign goal. And let's say we're running these ad variants in 10 different publications. I know this is a little extreme, but it's not uncommon to have that many variants within this kind of ad structure. So that is 10 factorial. Remember the 10 times 9 times 8, which turns out to be 3,628,800 different combinations. Again, a highly exaggerated scenario, but I'm sure enterprise marketing and content creation management pros can relate. And I'd argue that those elements that I counted out before, a lot of them either are metadata or require it to create, manage, and report on the content and media performance. If you're missing metadata, you're either delivering bad content or you're going to miss out on performance insights. And I'm not sure if the audience here is responsible for creating or managing rich media advertising, but I imagine there's a similar story can be told for the creation of rich media within your own DAM and CMS. And the last one is lost opportunities within recommendation engines and dynamic related content. I'm going to talk a little bit about this at first in relation to e-commerce, but I believe the application exists in large content ops as well. So think Amazon. Who else would you think that does an e-commerce recommendation engine better than them? Amazon's product catalog is rich with metadata, and here's a quick summary. There's a variety of metadata to consider to execute the way Amazon does. For example, metadata on the product listing itself. There's also metadata about me, the shopper, for example, that I already bought a book one time previously and the specific date I bought it. When I also investigated this, I also noticed that there is metadata on the various sellers in this book. These are visible sections and details on the product page. And then there's a lot going on behind the scenes, like semantic content analysis that matches up with the respective products or content and displays these other recommendations. And then on top of that, there's implicit behavior site data collected on me, like what I've searched for, what I've added to cart, what I've saved for later, etc. This metadata is a mix of dynamic creation and manual entry, yet it all has to map and associate properly in a relational database. The building of that outline or taxonomy, associating objects and defining the attributes of each is an important yet daunting task. Also consider when you're missing out on opportunities here, your engagement rates may be less than what's possible. If you're a content publisher, and who isn't these days, and you're not displaying key complementary content to your users, you're preventing them from lingering longer in your content ecosystem. Think Netflix. I believe they're also just to note, I believe they're also missing a bunch of ways to display related content, but it might be more of an interface issue versus just metadata. Nevertheless, even the best have this problem. And here's the example. I don't personally think the same movie recommendation should show up in 4 different rows in my Roku Netflix experience. Perhaps metadata around all the recommendation categories the video is in, which I'm also certain they have, paired with the current recommendation categories being displayed on my screen, Netflix could then consider suppressing that title from showing in a recommendation category if the title visibility is greater than 2. That's just a thought on how to use metadata and create dynamic experiences or dynamic related content. And I'm not sure if my example or explanation directly apply to your scenario, but the fundamental need to associate and relate content in your site so people can continue to use it exists for most companies. Great. So now considering I've identified those 5 challenge areas that I've seen, what are some of the overall obstacles organizations face when managing their DAM CMS metadata? At Claravine, we work with a lot of global brands on challenges related to what I've just mentioned, and there are 3 major areas that are almost always present. They include, there's little to no standardized data language or naming conventions for metadata values. There's also limited, if any, workflows or governance to complete the metadata requirements that do exist. And there's also many inefficiencies within the software systems themselves for bulk management of metadata. Keep in mind that subsets of your organization may do these things above very well, but for the collective, including agencies in the mix, these areas are often unaddressed. And let me go into each one of them a little bit further. First, no standardized language or naming conventions for metadata. Many organizations don't always take the time to create a common language nor enforce naming conventions on almost anything, let alone dozens or more of metadata fields. And frankly, DAMs that I see don't generally provide the functionality to enforce a common language or standardized values. There are no pick lists or other guidance on how the values should be formatted. I believe this is an inherent flaw in the digital asset management process. Some organizations may have an external taxonomy ontology system at best that have these rules, but it's not necessarily synced to the DAM to automate enforcement. Other organizations may have a master shared spreadsheet, which is common but inefficient and impossible to sync with the DAM. And regardless of where the shared metadata language repository is, it's still a manual process for users to check and create their values. Clearly a point for ongoing errors. I'm sure there are some in this webinar that would say they resolved these issues above, and I would say that they are ahead of the curve. The next is there are no workflows or governance to complete metadata requirements. I alluded to this above, but these systems don't generally have an automated process or wizard to more efficiently create the metadata for each asset, including a governance process aside from perhaps the basic, this field is required option. Additionally, there's no interconnectedness to metadata sets so that if a value is entered in one field, the system knows to proliferate related metadata automatically into the digital asset. And there's no notification system or checks and balances for inconsistent or missing values. There are enough content directors out there who'd agree that getting alerts and summaries on newly created digital assets to audit them would be a huge benefit. And the third is inefficiencies within these systems themselves for bulk management of metadata. Consider the multiplying factors of number of assets times the number of metadata schemas you might have and the number of fields within those schemas. And this really leads to an enormous amount of metadata to be managed. Let's say you have just 1,000 digital assets, which I believe is low by most standards. And then you have 3 metadata schemas, each with 7 metadata fields. That's 21,000 data points that you need to manage. And again, I believe that's a low sample scenario. I've learned that there are DAMs that don't address this with any type of bulk editor. One that makes it very difficult to even find errors in mass, and 2, the ability to fix them. Again, this seems to me another inherent flaw in a DAM or CMS. But am I wrong? I do want to take this moment in the middle of the presentation to remind that I'm not nearly an expert compared to many that are on this call. So please share in the QA portion if there's something I've misstated or overlooked. Honestly, I'm here to not just share my knowledge, but learn from you all as well. So moving on, I hope I've identified at least one area you can agree is a big problem. I'd like to explain this a little differently to now identify some areas you can optimize your metadata in that are truly meaningful to your company's performance. There are 6 ways that I see, at least, to get the most from your DAM CMS metadata. Considering that all that I've already presented, they include your site search or your faceted search and filters. Again, going back to your internal DAM CMS search utilities, your user-facing web and app presentation layer, data layer optimization opportunities, search engine optimization, and content performance analysis. These are the 6 examples I've identified. I'm sure there are others. By having standardized, and I do believe by having standardized and governed metadata done at scale, all of these areas can be dramatically improved. And I'll go into each one now. First, let's look at site search and filtered applications. These site and faceted search tools have become an essential functionality to websites, especially businesses that have large volumes of customer-facing content and large catalog e-commerce sites. Also, I don't want to assume everyone knows what faceted search is, but it's essentially the filters you can apply to refine these searches, like on the left-hand side of Amazon when you're drilling down in their product catalog. Ideally, all the content in your database that customers interact with has metadata that's associated and attached to your site's filters and faceted searches. If this metadata is overlooked, key content or products may be missing when your user chooses a specific filter criteria, and content and products may also be missing from related items sections. Having tools to recognize incomplete content and product metadata values can help fix issues around missing metadata. Again, I want to reference back to the metadata schema and respective field sets we talked about. Faceted search is often dynamic based on category. Different categories are going to require different schemas and fields. And then the multiplier issue I discussed earlier is an effect here. It can be resolved with better enforcement of standards and governance. You need to be able to control the ability to update a large set of metadata values with ease, and not just for existing values. What if the team who owns the faceted search wanted to implement another filter criteria, and that field requires data values across hundreds or thousands of records? Being able to bulk edit here is essential. And so if this was a priority project for me, my next step would be a content audit. If not easily done in a DAM or CMS, I would dump a table into something like Google Sheets, being sure that when I do that data dump to include all metadata fields, and then run filters on fields to look for blanks or odd values. Further, I'd go look at existing faceted search you have and first evaluate those particular fields in your content audit, and 2, think through what additional values, if present in that faceted search, would make this search function even more usable for your customers. The next one I want to talk about is your internal DAM and CMS search utilities. This problem is likely the most obvious one, but considering we still see it regularly here at Claravine, I think it was worth a highlight. By implementing standards and workflows around metadata creation, your whole organization can save time searching and save even more time avoiding repeat work. Considering the content production output of large enterprises, we know this is a costly problem. While it can be difficult to create a standard naming convention and apply consistent metadata, when this is applied, it does help lay the foundation for discovery and using assets. And then also just consider that in some instances, there is more to finding data than through just searching just a name or a common field value, but more complex scenarios like understanding what content should be used in certain business scenarios or for certain personas or site visitors. Take a PDF as an example, and there might be certain times these assets should be used in the sales cycle. With the application of more thorough metadata, this type of information becomes more easily discoverable and then foundational for getting the right piece of content for the right situation quickly. And so again, priority project, where if this was one for me, where would I start? Something I consider is actually surveying DAM CMS users and ask them if in the past 60 days, if they did a search in the DAM or CMS and the results ever came up empty. And additionally, how many times that may have happened. And then further ask your content creators if they've had to create or load a duplicate asset into one of your systems because someone could not find the original. And then more advanced application here was wondering if there are any tools that allow you to user behavior analytics within your own DAM and CMS. If you have a homegrown system, I'm sure it's possible, but if you're using a cloud DAM or CMS, you may have to push your vendor for a feature like that. The third opportunity is your user-facing web and app presentation layer. So not only is metadata useful for search enhancements and both internal and external, honestly, a lot of metadata is used at the presentation layer on product listings, articles, events, recipes, etc. Every attribute attached to a piece of content or product can, in theory, be used in the presentation layer of your site, mobile app, and so forth. Again, think about the Netflix recommendation engine. I don't understand exactly how it works, but they likely have standards when applying all of the content tags. A team of editorial users watching every minute and tagging, and I honestly don't see how they can do this tagging in an unstructured way, but maybe they do. Nevertheless, what they're doing is applying all kinds of metadata tagging to the content so they can create large buckets of what they call taste communities. But they don't just use this stuff behind the scenes to serve up their recommendations. They roll it up into often rather descriptive genre combinations like biographical tortured genius movies and understated independently dysfunctional family dramas. And that's more of an advanced example, but the same is true for recipe sites and all the metadata that is displayed to the user so they can understand how hard making an easy mini quiche actually is. And then the same is true for product catalogs, digital libraries like archive.org and so on. They all store metadata related to individual pieces of content, then display that content in easy to read and unique ways to improve the user's experience. I do think improving this one is complicated though. I'd probably look to your site's architect or your UX team to see if there is a website redesign planned or a proposed blueprint or taxonomy for one. And then if available, look through those documents to see how your content and respective metadata is intended for use. And just a book call out here, a great book on this is actually called Designing Connected Content. Our organization personally is going through a site re-architecture and build out, and this book provided actually a fantastic framework to approach it. It goes way beyond the presentation layer, but I believe it would be insightful to many professionals on the call today. Next is data layer optimization. So this is a little bit of an advanced topic, but prior to joining Claravine, I did work at an agency where we would actually configure the data layer for things like event-based analytics, as well as profile enrichment in marketing automation and CRMs. And we actually used a lot of metadata associated with content and assets on the page to pull off some rather advanced analytics and automation functions. As sites become more interactive, we're going to require more event-based tracking, customer journey analytics, which requires the respective data to really capture details of the user engagement. A lot of these details and variables that get stored actually come from metadata related to the content, products, digital item that the user engaged with. So if you ever go behind the scenes in some of these customer journey analytics tools, you will see the ways that your metadata, the ways that the metadata you're responsible for is used in in-depth analytics. In the screenshot on the slide, we're using e-commerce as an example, and you can see the technical configuration that there are these product attributes or metadata for ID, category, description. But the same could be true for non-e-commerce. Change that order complete value to video watched, and then it's a digital asset you're responsible for. And then think of all the metadata values your analytics team might want to store about that particular video, like the title, genre, rating, if captions were used, who created it, if it's associated with a campaign, etc. All of those metadata values are now being passed into customer journey analytics. However, to build this, though it does require serious cross collaboration and understanding. So I can almost guarantee this is not something that is incredibly mature in most organizations and is a priority project for the analytics team. So try to find out if your analytics team's built out an event tracking plan or schema. Keep in mind they may be building that plan only based on what they already can see. You could come in as an expert in your content or digital assets and say, wait, we have all of this metadata that might be useful for event tracking. Alternatively, what if we created some additional metadata attached to the content people are interacting with? And would having that information available for your analyses be valuable? I think starting the dialogue would be well worth it. Next in line is SEO, and I've had a long history with SEO. Been fortunate to get into it in the early 2000s, and it's evolved significantly over time. And I wanted to honestly just highlight one key area to optimize your metadata for SEO value. Not to get too technical again, but there's an object called article, among many other objects, noted by something called schema.org standards. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I'd check out schema.org. And this object has a variety of properties. And if you're unfamiliar with schema.org, it's a standard for structuring data on the web used by Google and others. And Facebook uses an alternative similar to this called Open Graph. And so these properties attached to this article object require values to be used, and they are marked up on your site in specific ways to identify the property value combination. And by marking up your articles in this way, you're actually providing these third-party sites like Google very specific and structured data about your content that can then be utilized in search results. And this isn't just applicable to articles, but videos, images, and many others. This structured data is what helps you get those rich snippets that allows you to stand out on the search engine result pages. Again, schema.org is a huge resource for this. And the last in the opportunities that I see is content performance analysis. And to be honest, this one is a little bit newer for me. From all the other items that I've just mentioned, I've actually had direct experience either building, auditing, or managing them. This one I actually haven't gotten my hands dirty with yet, but I know it's possible. As we have these discussions at Claravine with more advanced organizations, we do discover new applications for our platform, and this is one of the more recent and most compelling ones. One of the biggest challenges facing organizations is actually the ability to understand the value of the content and assets they are creating. While there sometimes exists metadata in the DAM CMS, there are many instances where these assets are then uploaded into other execution systems. The native IDs, which are associated and created in these systems, are only really able to be associated to marketing activities by the teams creating these experiences. So we can actually solve the problem by connecting the DAM and CMS as part of the workflow that these marketing teams are using your assets on. And by associating the two, we can actually connect the execution systems, the DAM systems, and the analytics systems to then see how your individual content is used and performing across all your different campaigns. So when you can do this, it really makes that metadata you created essential to the content performance assessment. And that's all I got. Hopefully you can see impactful standardized metadata can be for your business for bottom line. I've chosen Principal Skinner's nervous chuckle because it is hard to read a quiet and unseen audience. Before we go into questions, I do want to emphasize that I am available to go deeper on many of these topics in a separate call with you. My background is a little more technical, so I can absolutely go deeper into the actual execution of these recommendations if you want to chat. That being said, any questions?
Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, we have had some questions. And the first one is, how does artificial intelligence, machine learning, save me from what seems to be still a lot of manual labor with metadata?
Well, I thought that'd come up. That's a good question. I don't know that the manual labor is going to go away up front, because what we see, and I'll share, we're about to publish a white paper on a similar topic, but what we see is that good AI and machine learning actually requires quality data up front to build that accurate learning model. And so really it's the responsibility of creating that good metadata up front that then teaches these systems how to learn. And then from there, some of the manual labor should go away. I hope that makes sense. And I can talk about that more with whoever asked it.
Thank you. Okay, and the next question is, what do you mean by data standards?
Okay, good question. I guess in the most simplistic form, I would say data standards are the your organization's agreed upon collection of naming conventions and the values within, and perhaps maybe the rules of creating those. And so by having them in place and everybody globally is using them, everything that follows, like the customer experiences and your digital analytics, will benefit. So, I mean, when your data quality is high and the data flow is accurate, you're going to reap the rewards.
Great. Somebody missed the beginning of the session and just wanted to know if you could quickly go over the first problem that you listed that most dams don't answer.
That most dams don't answer?
Yes, I think you were listing the problems and they missed the very first one you mentioned.
Oh, I think of that one was the internal dam search, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
And
thank you.
then just the idea, yeah, so it's the internal dam search, basically, that people, your users who are actually using your dam to find existing content and assets that have been created, often come up with empty results. So whether it's because it wasn't thoroughly tagged or there's missing metadata, when these users can't find what they're looking for and it already exists, somebody is going to have to, they're wasting time searching, and then they're also going to have to ask somebody to create the work again. So it's the cost is also the duplicative effort.
Thank you. And then also the same person's asked, are there any industries with metadata schema standards already created?
Any industry, I mean, I guess when I've done my research on this, like, it's outside of marketing and such, but like the EPA is a great example of data standards and the application therein. So if anything, like, they might be a good model for that. Maybe I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but if you're looking for maybe a model of a mature data standards environment, that would be one of them.
Thank you. And then we've got a couple of comments as opposed to questions, which I think is quite useful.
Cool. I'm ready
And
to take
somebody
notes.
yeah, somebody said metadata standards and best practices are inherent in the governance of DAM or CMS to achieve findability of assets and most other information needs of the organization. So that's the first comment.
Okay.
And then someone else has said, is it better to train all users to ask for specific terms, or better to make uploaders mass apply different iterations, i.e., we have an icon of a female stick figure. Does that need to be tagged woman, 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 female, lady?
So that's kind of the project up front, is like the agreed upon, getting the cross-functional teams to agree upon what are the rules there for the data standards and ultimately the taxonomy, and then decide what those values are. So it really is an exercise in creating the definitions up front, and then getting everybody to understand, and that's where things like pick lists come into play. It's like, if it's an open text field, that's where the variance might cause problems. But if in that example, if it's just a pick list, you can only choose one of those that technically all means the same thing, and that's how you alleviate some of the data inconsistencies.
Great. So any more questions from the audience, send them now. If not, I think we'll draw it to a close. Michael, did you have anything further to say before we finish?
No, we'll follow up with the recording, and obviously you have my contact information to reach out, and just was glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Oh, quick questions come through. Are you happy to take that, Michael?
Which one is it? I see a list of them. Is one at the bottom?
Yeah, down at the bottom. Any exciting developments in metadata alignment and maintenance? We can follow up offline if you want.
Yeah, I'll follow up offline on that one.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next webinars and online courses attendees. Thanks for joining. Bye.